You've got the National Archives talking about how important it is the American people have access to records while hiding records in violation of the law from the American people. First up, though, is the new Freedom of Information Act lawsuits that Judicial Watch filed on the Biden raid on Trump's home. The unprecedented, reckless Biden raid on Trump's home that was, as I say, conceived in sin, in the sense, and I'm going to repeat why it was conceived in sin, because the Justice Department had no good faith basis to target Trump for records they had no business having, because Judicial Watch had uncovered, or we had tried to pursue 10 years ago plus, records that Bill Clinton had, tape recordings he had of meetings or phone calls he was having with foreign leaders, phone calls he was having with members of Congress, all of which, under the Justice Department's theory, now would have been covered under the Presidential Records Act. So when we sued, advocating just that point of view, the Justice Department told us no. If the president had those records after he left the presidency, they were presumptively personal. And the court ruled to that effect as well, suggesting that the archives had no business asking or trying to get any records that a president had delineated or kept on his own after the presidency. So there was no authority to even demand the records, according to this court analysis, not only the Clinton records case, but looking at major appellate and Supreme Court decisions that guided the decision-making there. And so when the Justice Department and the archives started harassing Trump over these records and started, well, obviously they raided his home looking for so-called classified information. There was no basis for that because the information necessarily was personal, necessarily was unclassified. And Judicial Watch has been in the forefront of highlighting that. You know, we're sensitive about that issue. You know why? Because we lost. We made the arguments the Justice Department is making today, and they told us we were wrong. And all of a sudden they changed their minds, did a 180. Why? Because it's Trump. So it's that type of lawlessness and double standards. Bill Clinton's protected while Trump is targeted. Just remember that. Bill Clinton has been protected when it comes to presidential records while Trump has been targeted. And there's been other news about Barack Obama and records that he may or may not have had that were not in the custody and control of the presidential archives, the National Archives. Evidently, he had records in a warehouse. The communications I saw indicate. Now, of course, the National Archives is coming out with statements saying, oh no, they were always in our custody and control. Well, the records don't suggest that or seem to contradict that. So there's a lot of debate about why it is they treat Trump one way while treating Bill Clinton in the least. We know for sure another way, and we're still looking at how they were treating Barack Obama. So what Judicial Watch has been doing, obviously, is educating the American people about this issue. We began doing it in February when this issue first popped up. The media started going after us, trying to, quote, fact check our analysis, which was hilarious because Judicial Watch is the nation's leading expert on federal records issues. We've been litigating those issues for nearly 30 years. And so then the raid happens, and they really go crazy because the media starts getting, starts putting out news stories suggesting that I had been advising Trump one way or another on this records issue. And as I told you last week, I'm not confirming or denying who I'm talking to or whether or not I've been providing advice to President Trump or telling him what I thought. It's none of their business, and frankly, it's none of your business, with all due respect. So the media's gone crazy. But the reality, and of course, what the response is to focus on how I look rather than the arguments I'm making as it relates to the prior policy precedent and law related to the handling of records. And Judicial Watch, once the raid happened, we knew it was corrupt because, again, it was a complete 180 from prior Justice Department positions on the status of records in the custody of a former president. And we sought more information about the raid. We took the lead and successfully unsealed the affidavit, which showed that the raid was based on weak tea and based on, it looks like, a dishonest presentation of the law to the magistrate judge who signed off on it. And then shortly after the raid, after we successfully obtained more information or forced the release of information about the raid, we sued the National Archives, which has been hiding records about issues tied to the raid. So isn't that rich? You've got the National Archives talking about how important it is the American people have access to records while hiding records in violation of the law from the American people. And in the meantime, you've got the Justice Department and the FBI also ignoring Freedom of Information Act requests from Judicial Watch. So what did we do? We just sued them again and again. So lawsuit number 2 and number 3 on this raid. We've got 3 federal lawsuits now, and the 2 most recent ones were against the Justice Department / FBI for records about the raid. Let me pull up the release here and I'll give you the specifics of what we were asking for. We asked for these records back in August, so they've had more than enough time to respond. You know, technically the government has, not technically, under law the government has 20 days to acknowledge or respond somehow to your FOIA request. And sometimes they can give themselves an extra 10 days administratively to respond, so more or less a month. And if they don't respond, you can sue. But we know the government's slow, and we don't sue, usually we don't sue immediately upon the 20 or 30-day deadline, because sometimes we might get records shortly thereafter, and no use wasting court resources if it's just going to be processed and, you know, just waiting a few days will get us the information. But we have significant experience in figuring out when we're being ignored and when only a lawsuit is going to get information, and that's the case here. That's why we sued the Justice Department and the FBI for really basic, simple sets of records. The first set was all records or meetings or phone calls between the FBI Director Wray, his Deputy Director, his Associate Deputy Director, and other folks pertaining to the search warrant. Also included are communications between the FBI and the Executive Office of the President. So they're hiding any records they have. They're refusing to tell us even whether they have records about communications between the FBI and the Executive Office of the President, the Biden White House, about this raid. And also we want records between the FBI and the Secret Service about this raid, because as you may recall, the Secret Service helped enable this attack on the President's civil liberties with this illicit raid. So the FBI is hiding all those records. And similarly, the Justice Department is also hiding records. We sought all records documenting the application, the authorization, and communications related to the execution of the search warrant at the residence of former President Trump. So we want records about the raid. What's so hard about giving us records about the raid? And in our experience, if they don't want to give basic information about something that is of significant public interest, that the Justice Department and Attorney General Garland has already admitted, something that's of significant public interest, never before in the history of the United States, as the Justice Department or any federal law enforcement authority raided the home of a former president. And certainly not a raid on the flimsy pretext of a document dispute. Who are they kidding? No wonder they don't want to give us any documents. So we've got the lawsuit against the National Archives, we have the lawsuit against the Justice Department, we have the lawsuit against the FBI to get records about this raid. And obviously, maybe it's not obvious if you don't know about Judicial Watch, but if you know about Judicial Watch, it is obvious. This is just the beginning. Because we have other FOIA requests you can be sure we'll be pursuing in court when the need arises. And so just so you have a brief update as to what's been going on with the document fight between the Justice Department and the Trump team. So, you know, I highlighted this special master last week. He's a senior judge, which means he's not working full time. He works part-time for the federal courts as he kind of goes into retirement. But it looks like he's been taking going a little too far or beyond what the Judge Cannon had authorized in setting up the special master process. He was speeding things up. He was also requiring President Trump to affirm certain information, potentially under oath, that the special master appointment order didn't really contemplate. And so the judge clipped his wings. Judge Cannon came in and said, no, A, they can get more time, and B, the president doesn't need to come in and go under oath about what the nature of these records are. That's just a step too far. This is a document dispute issue. But the judge evidently wanted to conduct some type of discovery or something of that nature, or put people under oath on the record. And it seemed to be a little bit aggressive in the sense that it wasn't required for him to do his job. And on top of that, it turns out, and this is the other news this week, is that the government kind of admitted to the Trump team, after being dishonest and withholding this information seemingly from the court, even though they likely knew better, that they didn't take, quote, 11,000 documents from the president's home, but it was actually 200,000 pages. So, when you're in a fight with the government, sometimes they argue with you about, well, this is a record, is this a document, how many pages are in the document? So, depending on what definition you're using, you could have one record that has 10 pages, or one document that has 10 pages. And so when people are saying there were 11,000 records or documents taken, unless someone says something otherwise, you're just assuming typically that it's pages. Turns out there were 200,000 pages. So which shows you just how broad and expansive and abusive the raid on Trump's home was. So you've got this still percolating along, and of course you've got the president being abused out of the New York Attorney General's office in New York with another civil lawsuit designed to destroy his company. You have another local left-wing attorney, the district attorney in this case, in Fulton County, Georgia, trying to target and jail folks who were concerned about the elections in Georgia and who were exercising their First Amendment rights. You have the continued abuse of the January 6th Rump Committee, run by the Pelosi gang. And of course you have the Justice Department, which is still harassing American citizens who had the temerity to dispute Biden's election by exercising their rights under the First Amendment and other amendments of the Constitution and federal and state law to raise questions about the election. So you've got this major suppressive effort by the Justice Department, by Congress, by state officials targeting Trump. And the icing on the cake, or maybe the worst aspect of this, is their raid on his home. And so the media probably wants to move on from this, but Judicial Watch isn't going to move on. We're going to try to figure out what went on with this wildly abusive raid on his home. And we're going to stand for the truth, and we're going to stand for the rule of law. Because as Trump has always, as observed many times before, they want to get to you through him. And so the abuses you're seeing of President Trump are abuses, frankly, that others have already been targeted with in these January 6 out-of-control investigations. So this is serious. This is not about Trump. It's about whether the civil rights of all Americans are going to be protected from politicized law enforcement entities at the federal, state, and local level. So this is a dramatic time for the American experiment. And you can bet Judicial Watch is going to stand on the side of the Constitution, stand on the side of the rule of law, and stand on the side of a Republican form of government that the left these days seemingly wants to overturn. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to hit that subscribe button and like our video down below.